Serious people who have accidentally killed somebody. How did it happen? Struck their vehicle with mine. Didn't see them. Husband was decapitated, not wearing a seatbelt, and he had been drinking. I was 18. 5 years of depression and heavy drug abuse on my side. I still wish I could change it. I tried telling the family I was sorry but no response. The screams that day from the wife lay in my nightmares for eternity. Life happens. I was driving an armored vehicle and a minivan crossed into my lane. Instead of braking or swerving right into someone's tiny house, I tried to cut across the left lane and into an open field. Hit her van head on. My friend riding in the passenger seat smashed his head on the front windshield, fell unconscious on my lap. I thought he was dead. I stopped the vehicle and made sure he was okay. Then jumped out and ran a few blocks while dialing 911 to get the intersection that I was at. Ran back to the minivan I had hit, and the woman was crushed inside. 1 to 2 years later I was charged with negligent homicide and spent some time in jail. I wish it didn't happen, but she was driving home from work and I was driving to work and it just did. It doesn't really affect me at all in my day-to-day life. I also killed a few people in Afghanistan, but that wasn't accidentally. It wasn't me directly, but I lived in kind of a rough neighborhood, and one day my friend calls me and says these guys have been following him, and he was getting freaked out and wanted to come to my house to chill for a bit before walking back home. He was about a mile or two from my house. Asked if I could walk out and meet him so he didn't have to walk alone. I told him he was crazy and he was imagining things. Well, turns out he wasn't crazy. He was beaten to death after he put up a fight when they tried to mug him. I couldn't believe how selfish I was. Was depressed for about a year after it happened. Now if any one of my friends call me for help, no matter how big or little the problem is, I help. When I was 9 years old, one of my sister's ex-boyfriends decided it was a great time to shoot up our apartment door. He fired 9 times, missing most of the people in this 3-bedroom apartment in the slums of South Phoenix. My sister was there at the time with her new boyfriend. She grabbed his gun as he left out of a window and started to shoot back at this guy outside of our door. She stops shooting and I hear a thud. She's hurt on the ground and the guy is still outside yelling, calling her a bitch / slut / whatever. I picked up the gun, went to the barred window next to our front door and pointed and shot. Gun fell from my hand. I fell back. He fell down. Didn't get up. It was labeled as self-defense. My mom was gone, and I didn't even know my older sister was there with a dude. I just woke up to all of this chaos. I don't think about it anymore, but I don't feel guilty about it. Throwaway time. This happened 20+ years ago, so the statute of limitations is up. I think I ran over someone. I was going to a school dance. I was driving through a heavy fog when I felt something that made me think I'd run over large branches. I kept going because, by golly, my car kept going, and honestly, where I'm from, it wouldn't be unusual for large branches to be in the road. They found a body in the road later. I don't remember the full details, but they said he'd been, I think, heavily intoxicated, dragged into the middle of nowhere, and left for dead in the middle of the road. I think they charged his friends with murder. Given the circumstances, I think they wanted him dead and tried to make it look like an accident. They publicly asked for information. I kept my trap shut because I was ignorant. I thought I'd get a manslaughter charge since I'd just turned 18. You can get up to 10 years of prison for involuntary manslaughter where I live, and law enforcement had been cracking down at that time. I found out later that when they examined the body, he'd been run over multiple times, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody came forward. Certainly nobody I knew went to jail, and I know other people from my area went down that road that night. When I was 12 there was a marathon for school fundraising. It was a casual affair. Many parents walked along with the students. The trails weren't really marked off, but there was a little map they handed out. Many parts of the marathon were on bike paths and through paved walking trails. We were allowed to ride our bikes, as many of us were young kids. At one point in the marathon there was a little footbridge, maybe 20 feet long over a little creek. It was landscaped and arched in such a way that, if a short person was at one side of the bridge, that person would not be able to see someone on the other side of the bridge. The bridge was not very wide, barely enough for 3 people walking abreast. The decking was made of old warped 4x6 timbers or something. They may have even been recycled railroad ties. The sides were heavy duty metal, very sturdy. This bridge is in a park near where a parental unit lived at one point, and I had been up and down the trails and over the bridge many times. My friend and I found that if you got enough speed on the bridge, there was a timber near the apex that you could hit and lift up on your bike and catch what felt like some serious air for a 12-year-old. We could get maybe 5 feet of distance, but only a few inches of lift. So during the marathon, my friend and I come around the corner and see the bridge up ahead, and of course we decide we are going to jump it. We race each other as fast as we can to be the first over the bridge, while passing walkers and other bikers. The next part is fuzzy in my head. I spent so much time as a young person stricken with guilt that I told myself lies, made up imaginary situations, went back and forth blaming everyone else and myself. I guess I can only tell you as much as I know for certain. There were 2 young kids on their bikes crossing the bridge at the same time. I was over the bridge first, popped my bike over the crest, and my eyes went wide as a man on a bike was coming the opposite direction. He juked out of the way of a couple kids flying through the air, lost control and plowed into the 2 younger kids. This was before the era of strict bike helmet rules. I don't think anyone involved was wearing one. The 2 kids experienced serious injuries. One later died in the hospital from head wounds. The other had a broken arm. That was the last year that the marathon was run. Our schools took bike helmets far more seriously after that. I blamed myself, and I wish I could trade places with that kid. Give him the life I robbed of him by being a reckless idiot. The experience had helped make me into a somber shut-in of a teenager. I missed a huge chunk of socializing and learning about social situations, and those effects have carried over into the rest of my life. I sometimes wonder how my life would be different if not for that day. Oh, something I can contribute to. The year is 2009, January or February, and I'm in Puerto Rico. We are out one night drinking heavily and leaving Church's Chicken in Los Angeles, located in a less than ideal neighborhood. We are walking along being jackasses to the hookers propositioning us when we hear somebody call to us in English. We turn around and there is this mid-20s blonde, pregnant woman, maybe about 5 feet 3 inches. She comes running up to us. "Oh, thank God you speak English. My car is out of gas at the station by the corner and my card isn't working, and my husband isn't answering the phone." Hold up, we cut her off and circle up, discuss whether it's a scam or if she legit needs gas, and we decide to be decent human beings and kick her a few bucks each. We hop on the next bus and we are out of there. The next morning we get contacted by authorities asking about an incident right by the bus stop. The lady never made it back to her car. Some guys had seen us hand her the money, and as soon as we got on the bus grabbed her and beat her to death. So by being not a dick for once in my life, I got a woman killed. I was 12 riding my bicycle to my grandmother's house in a kind of big avenue. This was in Mexico. I was riding on the right lane with cars passing by my left side and lots of parked cars on my right. I was on a big and tall bike when a guy on a bicycle came from an intersection on the right without stopping. He was turning left, so he came straight to me. I was riding really fast. We collided head to head, literally. I just remember waking up dizzy, looking at the handlebars and the front tire of my bike all messed up. I apparently fell over one of the cars parked on my side, and then looking at the other guy, he looked on his foot as he hit the ground with his head. I remember lots of blood coming from his ears and mouth. The ears are the ones that I remember the most, and his eyes open, but he wasn't moving at all. Lots of people around him, and just a couple guys checking on me, telling me not to move and to relax. I just had lots of bruises and a concussion. I left the scene and went to my grandma's where my parents were and told them the story. They didn't believe everything, so we went over there. It was just a couple blocks from the house, and everybody was still there with a couple ambulances and cops and the body covered with a white blanket. My parents took me to one of the ambulances and to talk to some of the cops about what happened, and that was it. They got my parents' info and apparently that was it. I didn't ride a bike for years after that, and sometimes think about that guy's face and feel sick. I mean, I've seen gore videos, but actually looking a dead person is way different. But really, I don't have remorse. I've always saw it as the accident it was. Sorry for the shitty writing. English is obviously not my first language. After my dad dropped me off at high school one day, he went missing for about 10 hours. The drive to school from my house is in the countryside, and while my mom and I were driving home we passed my dad in his parked car that was in a lot adjacent to the road. I didn't see him, and he died from heat exhaustion. That was 7 years ago, and it's still difficult knowing that, if I saw him when we passed the road, that maybe he would have lived. The worst part was that when we were at home waiting to hear from him, my cell phone rang, and it was from his phone. I will never forget the short-lived happiness I felt, because in that moment I thought my dad was okay, but it was only a firefighter informing us they found him. My boyfriend and I were living together, and he had severe depression most of his life. We started having arguments and I went to stay at my mom's house. He had a gun in the house, which he recently bought, and I didn't get rid of it. I came home a couple days later, and he was lying on the bed, and he had shot himself. I don't think I will ever forgive myself for not getting rid of the gun. In December 2005 I was mugged at gunpoint in Philadelphia when transferring trains through the city, and ended up killing the guy in self-defense. I gave the guy my money and my laptop, which is all that I had on me, and he went to hit me with the butt of his pistol when I grabbed his wrist and twisted it to get him to drop the gun. I'm not sure if I twisted it the wrong way or if he just tried to break free, but the gun ended up pointing back into his sternum, and when I hit him to get him to drop it, the trigger pulled and he shot right through his chest. His hands immediately went limp, gun dropping to the ground soon followed by his body. Still alive, he just looked me in the face and said I'm supposed to be raising a family. He then coughed twice and said I got a little girl. By now the transit police had run over to where we were and were putting me in cuffs. You know, the whole arrest before asking questions thing, as I just watched this man that tried to mug me die over the course of 15 seconds. I then felt very cold. Incredibly cold. I was wearing a thick leather jacket, a long sleeve shirt under it, a hat, normal weather attire, but I suddenly felt freezing cold. The transit police reviewed the camera evidence and several hours later, that night ruled that it was unintentional manslaughter through the use of self-defense, and I was free to go. I was 20, he was 19. Since that day I've been extremely distant from most of the people I know and care about. I'll never forget the pain I saw in that guy's eyes, way further than any physical pain that I've ever seen anybody go through. I'll never forget that cold feeling that brushed over me as that man died. I'll probably never stop thinking I should have just let him have my stuff, but I'll also never stop thinking if I hadn't done what I did, I probably wouldn't be here. 4 years later, I'm still a very hard shell to crack. I don't open up, I'm very lazy, zero motivation. I know I need therapy, but I know I can't afford it. I've since developed crippling depression, intense social anxiety paired with OCD. Going through these things, I escape through video games and television. I let myself go 4 years since the incident, and between weight gain and weight loss on extremes of about 80 pounds per year, I was 11% body fat, and in amazing shape when this happened. I went on to gain 80 1 year, lose 80 in a month, gain 50 in 2 months, lose 40 in a month. The cycle continues like that. I can only cry at funerals, and have a general inability to express disdain or sadness. Laughter is very forced. I have no feelings of anger, ever, and any anger that I put forth is just acting. My friendships have almost all dried up. I have problems holding a job before getting a relapse of serious depression and fading away, partly because I'm so excited and I love to work that I burn myself out, and the only way I know how to cope with things is to fall back into the same cold solitude that harsh depression brings someone to. I feel like a prisoner in my own mind, and that my sentence has no end date. I didn't do anything except train a man the way I was trained at work, which was wrong. He was cleaning industrial printing rollers with acetone beside a RAV light when a spinner kicked on, throwing the acetone at him and the light sparked the acetone, and he was engulfed in flames. He ran and tried to roll, but he took 2 extinguishers to put the flames out. He was burned over 92% of his body. He was put into a coma for a month, but when he woke up his heart and lungs stopped working. His lungs when burned from breathing in the flames. I said fuck the job, told the company I needed more money to do that shit or I wanted laid off. Also his family got close to $1 million from his death. Money from workers' comp and his incurrence. I was walking around New York with a camera bag filled with a few $1,000s worth of equipment. It was at night and I was walking down a dim lit street alone. I walked by this dude standing next to a doorway and I hear him tell me to stop. I turned around and looked and he had a gun pointed at me. A bit shocked, I froze for a second. He told me to hand him the bag, so I started to take it off my back. As I reached over to give it to him, I kicked him in the stomach and he stumbled back a few steps and I kicked him again a few times till he fell. He went to point the gun at me again, and I tried to wrestle it out of his hand, but I couldn't get it loose. I forced him to point the gun towards himself, and I forced the trigger down, with his finger still on the trigger. He died right there.